Morning, everyone. This is Frank over at Sylvan. I've got Paul and Adam are with me here as well, and we are going to try and answer questions for you today. We received a few questions via email prior to today's session, so we've prepped a couple things for those, and we're going to go through and answer those. As far as getting us more questions, you can use the chat feature and we'll try and address questions, or if you have questions about what we're talking about at the particular moment in time, we'll try and monitor the chat and incorporate answers into our discussions. Certainly thanks for joining us. And then at the end of the session, depending on how much time's left, I can also unmute the phones, and that might give you all a chance to chime in on a couple things. So, with that, Adam's going to be talking a little bit about a question we got concerning how you can move views from one view group to another in Stratum. And some of the question came up asking, ideally they like to click and drag on that stuff and move them from view group to view group. And that functionality is not currently available. I can tell you it's something we're considering. But at this point, that's not available. So there are a couple ways, though, that have changed over time, along with how you've been able to move things traditionally. Along with this, Adam's also going to talk a little bit about how you can change the type of view, moving it from personal to global when you're in a view.
Hi, great, thanks, Frank. So basically what you see is the homepage of our demonstration for viewer. So we're at the homepage of the latest and greatest version, 7.0. And basically, as you can see over here on the left side, we've got quite a few view groups. So we feel your pain. We understand that, it would be certainly nice to just kind of drag and drop this stuff around, but as Frank said, we're looking into that. Hopefully, that's something in the future that we can look forward to. But at this point, probably one of the easier ways to move these things around, if you're a view administrator at least, is if you go into the admin utilities menu, you will have access to the view menu. And so if we click on the view menu, which over the releases have really been improved upon quite nicely. There's a lot of really good data points here. But one of the things, and in all honesty, I haven't messed around with this one too much. But I didn't really realize that you can do something like this. But you can come in here, and if you notice, there's a button up here, essentially made for moving the view to other view groups. So just keep in mind it's a move. So if you wanted to retain where it resides already, then you still want to select, where it resides today already. So if you wanted to remain in the default view group, certainly you're going to want to select that. But, I'd also like to maybe select some other areas here, so you can move it certainly to either one view group or multiple view groups. A view can certainly, reside in multiple view groups. And one of those reasons why is that certainly you might have a user group out there that can only see one of those particular view groups. So this is a great way to share the view across the different user groups that you might have out there that only have access to certain view groups.
And one other thing just about this feature in the view maintenance, we probably talked about this with you before, but this feature was actually originally designed not for the specific topic of this question, but so that you could go in and highlight a bunch of views. So you could come in here and say, all based on the last update date or last use date, you can search this stuff and, anything that hasn't been used recently, let's say I'm going to highlight these, I'm just making this up. But now I could move all those and I could select if I had, say, an archive folder, et cetera. I could go ahead and do something like that. So you can select multiples in here. I use the Shift key to do that. You can use the Control key too if you want to highlight individual ones. So that's just one way you can change the view group. Another way you can use this to change the view group.
Yeah, I really think as a view administrator, I know I personally have been dealing with a lot of views and within certain environments, this is a great way, I think, to manage your views and to move them around to the different view groups. So this is really one of the better ways to do this. But if we were to like go into one of these views, for instance, there's other ways that we could do this as well. For instance, if I were to just run the view, if we go into the View Explorer, there's yet another way that we can actually go in and change the properties of the view itself. And so if we go open up the View Explorer, we're inside of the view now, and we check the properties of the view. And I'm going to go ahead and close this little welcome to version 7.0 screen. We can see down here then the view groups that are available down here as well. So if I wanted to change, for instance, or move this view to another view group, then I could certainly go ahead and select the different view groups that I might want to change to and have this view reside in. So, you know, this is another way where you're inside of the view, and now we're checking the properties, the very top folder of the View Explorer, which is the view itself, and we're right-clicking and we're going into properties, and that allows us to access the view groups that this particular view is currently residing in, and also allows us to manage, you know, where else we might want to this view to reside in as well.
This is also the place where you could change the type of view. So if you wanted to move take a personal view and make it shared or global, you can do that. You can do it right here, and you can change that here. You can also, at this point, if you're a view administrator, change the owner of the view. So you can do that as well. So if you change, and you can change the owner, if someone's left the company or something like that, you can change who owns all this stuff as well. So things like that. I think another part of that question was also if you have to have view names must be unique. That is true, but as you move something from, you can now, there was a change, I forget when it was, in 6.5 or something, where you can just change the view type. You don't have to go create a copy of it to have a global view, or you can just change the type and then you don't have to change the name.
Well, here's what might be happening is that you might be in a view and you're coming up to the Save As and you're like, okay, I want this view to not only reside, you know, in that particular view group, but, you know, other view groups as well. If you do this and you press on Save, you can't really use the Save As a utility to move the view to view groups.
That's a good point.
Really
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because Save As, by design, is making a copy.
Correct.
And trying to resave it.
That's kind of the point I want to make here, because if I try to save this, it's not going to allow me to save it because of the view name.
Right. Yeah. So. Okay, so that was one of the first questions we got. We got another question about storing data about something. Say, in a particular, the specific question was about email addresses that were longer than the 30 characters you can put in a pickup field, and Paul has some ideas on that.
All righty, let me switch over, hopefully, to a different environment. So, yeah, so email addresses typically get stored within Stratum in an attribute field to a dimension. As we all probably know, attribute fields are right now a max of up to 30 characters. So the specific question was that this customer's ERP system, email addresses are 40 characters, and they're moving to change that, actually to increase it up to 100 characters long. So what do you do? Are there any options within Stratum to be able to handle that? And yes, there is. One of the ways to do that, or an option to do that, is to take that long email address and basically chop it up, if you will, into multiple attribute fields within a dimension. And then use the power of Viewer to be able to concatenate those back in and use that as an email address itself. So I've got View up on the screen right now. And let me open up a few items within the View Explorer. So we have email addresses at what we call the rep broker or sales rep. And as you can see within my Stratum environment, I've added 3 email address sections or components, if you will. I'm going to go ahead and highlight those, and if my environment was at the latest release, I could do these all at once. I'm going to go ahead and open those up. And our mouse is a little pokey. So here's the email address components, and all I did on a number of these just for demo purposes was just to show you, here's for each of these 30 characters. So email 1 has the first 30, email 2 has the second, and then I added some other stuff as well. I've also included under Mark, I've got my email address, and I'll show that to you in a minute. So that's the attribute fields for the rep broker. Now, obviously, I don't need to display those to the user. Whoops. So if I were to hide them, there we go. Now let me show you down at the bottom what you can do, and it's a simple calculated column. Go ahead and edit that. And it's simply concatenating those 3 components together. And what's really nice is if there are trailing spaces on any of these, it'll just put the characters up together, if you will. So email 1, 2, and 3 are just going to be concatenated together. So finally what I did was on the concatenated email address that's showing, I've just set that up as a hyperlink. So if I hover over that, it's going to do the function called mail to, and it's going to take that value, that concatenated value, as a hyperlink. Same idea, but now I've just prefixed that with mail to. And as I open that up or click on that, I've got that available to me. And I've got it set up so that it opens up my exchange, in this case. And then I send emails out as if I'm Frank. So yeah, definitely a way to be able to handle that. It works out very nicely within a calculated column.
Okay, that was about the other question that we had. So shifting gears, and another question that's come up that we wanted to talk a little bit about was, and I know it's caused some people some consternation at the beginning of the year, so this seemed like a timely time to talk about it. We're maybe a month late, but it was columns in Stratum that are defined as going from say January to previous month. And if you're on a calendar year and you say January to previous month for your column definitions for your from and to in the first month of the year, that's an invalid time range. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about what we've done. We've made some changes over the last couple of releases around this and how we handle it, and talk a little bit about why we did that and some of the other options you have. So if I'm just going to go into, I put together an Excel little example here, and if you stick with me in my example, this is going to relate back to a view that I've got. So the idea is the current date is January 2nd of 2017. Let's assume that I have Stratum set up as based on a calendar year. So my year starts in January. Now, if you were using a fiscal calendar, the same would apply. You just change the month to whatever the first month you have. But then let's just say I have a couple of columns that I want to talk about. The first column goes for the current year, and it goes from January to the current month. So my concept in this column is to show year-to-date numbers for whatever measure I'm looking at. And that and in the month of January, that will actually be okay. That's not a problem, because that's going to show January 17, which is the current year based on the current date, to January of 17. So that's going to be okay. Let's say I have a second column, and it shows me it starts in January, and my concept is I want to see year to date as I move through the year through the previous month, or maybe my last closed month. So when I'm in, I don't know, when I'm in April, I want to see January to March, because that's the last closed month that I have. Well, at the beginning of the year, when I say current year and current year from January to previous month, that causes me an invalid date range, because essentially the from is okay, because that resolves to January of 17, but the previous month for the current year is actually December of 2016. So now that's going backwards in time, and we don't do time travel in Stratum, so you can't specify that, and that causes a problem. And previously, that just caused you a problem, and then you couldn't change it, and it was really awkward. So our first change that we made was to allow you to say, what were you trying to do? Well, as we move through the year, you'd been trying to see year-to-date numbers through the previous month. So what we said was that in January, or the first month of the year, you're going to want to see January through December, which is the previous month, year-to-date numbers through the previous month. So we just backed that up to say, we're going to show you January through December of the previous year, in this case of 2016. So the logic with that was to try and match what you'd been doing all along, to show you year-to-date numbers for the previous month. And if the previous month was December of the prior year, year-to-date would be January of that year through December. So that's one thing. And that's what you'll see down here, where this Stratum uses. This particular row just says this is what Stratum actually does. And that was the initial change that we made. I don't remember when that came out, in 6 or something like that. But then additionally, we've added additional functionality, because you were locked into using that particular selection when we did that, and not everybody wanted that to happen. So I'm going to flip over to Stratum and just show you some examples here. Here's a pretty simple view that allows you to see some examples. And all of these examples here, these all work fine, because I was trying to say sales for the current month, which would just be, in my case, assuming it's January of 2017, January to January, that works. January last year, that's going to work, because again, that's year to year. But all these things work fine, because these are going through the current month, year to date up through the current month. But these last two columns actually go through year to date through the previous year. So you can see that if I double click on this column to maintain the time, this message comes up. And you can see in this message what's important are really two things. Right here is the list of measures in your view that have this problem that you need to think about. So that tells you, if all my columns had it, there'd be, I don't know what I have here, 6 columns or something, they'd all show up there. But these are the 2 columns that are a problem right now. And I can either accept that, or on the column I'm in, I could say I want to edit that, and now it'll come in here, and it'll provide me the ability to edit this year-to-date column if I wanted it to be, I don't know, January to January in the first month, whatever you want it to be, but you can now edit the from and to just like you could traditionally. So it lets me know that. And then I could change it there. You guys already know how to do this. I don't have to show you how to change stuff here. And the same thing would be true in this column. If I double click on this, I'm going to get this message, and now it lets me go in and edit that column. So you have options here on how this works, in addition to a little bit of an explanation on what we did there to help handle the idea of what we're doing when you have January through previous month, which is essentially an invalid time range in the first month of the year. And that would be true for the first week of the year, first day of the year, whatever. you can run into this problem if you're ever using previous month or using negative offsets in the to column in the from and tos here. So over here, if this is ever set to previous or whatever, or last year or last month, or if you're using any kind of an offset down here, a negative offset, you can run into this problem. So that's a little bit about that. Let's see. Another thing that's come up, we didn't get a specific question on this, but we've actually had a number of people ask about this, and we thought it would be a good idea for us to talk a little bit about some of the processing options that are available to you. So today in Stratum, if you wanted to see the processing options, you can actually go into Help, and that's actually in the connector. So if you search on the connector, if I search on that, let's see, I'll go over here, and this gives me, this shows me some basic help about the connector, but you can actually open the connector help from here to get all of the detail as well. And I can open that help, and amazingly enough over here, there's a list of processing options. So I'm going to go into processing options, and there's quite a bit of data on this. We're going to talk from this quick start, which talks a little bit about the options, and I thought it would be good to kind of just point out a couple of things. First of all, there's a number of options available that you may or may not be aware of. There's full, there's limited, there's something called the post process, but then there's standard and trickle. And these are all new options that have been added over the last 4 or 5 releases. And an important point here is what's in this box right here, which really talks about if you're using a standard and you've made any metadata changes. So essentially this means you've gone into admin and changed your dimensions, your measures, your calendars. If you've changed any of that stuff, we're going to force a full process because we have to redesign the cube to fit your new metadata definition. But there's some other things here, new processes that are out there. I think most people are probably doing a standard. Would you say that's true, guys, or at night?
Standard or limited.
Yeah, and if you are doing a standard, you should probably really consider limited, I would think. Wouldn't you guys agree that?
Yes.
That because a limited, the beauty of a limited process versus a standard, it basically does essentially the same stuff, making the assumption you've made no metadata changes to your cube, to your definitions. But it also provides limited, minimal or no interruption to your users. So this can be running and people can be in Stratum while this is running. So this allows you to do that. It also automatically selects just those categories that have had data changes. That is also correct, right, guys?
Yep.
So it's not going to reprocess any data, say forecasts or budgets or whatever it may be that are static and aren't changing. So that's a good feature with that particular piece. Can one of you guys talk to when you might rerun a post process?
On the post process, it primarily deals with things like user lists, roles as well, and also setting up the information when you do searches for values on dimensions. And in some cases, the main portion of the queue process functions just fine. Sometimes you might have a timeout or some situation on the server, and the connector process fails during the post process, and you can see that clearly in the log. What you need to do is just run the connector in a post-process mode. You don't have to run the whole connector process again, and that'll basically do those steps to handle those things that I talked about. The other thing is it shows right in the middle of the screen there, you may have some dynamic user lists as well. Maybe you've updated those, or you need to get those updated on a more frequent basis than simply every night. You can run this post-process as well. during the day, and not a problem.
There's really, along with the full, which is essentially, the other thing with a full, I think, is after you do an upgrade, you're supposed to run a full as well to make sure all the new features get included. But a limited and a post are, we talked a little bit about standard, which has been a long time process that we've had available, and it's what everyone was probably originally installed with if you've had Stratum for any length of time. But, you know, the knock on the standard process is that no one can be in Stratum while that's running. It also processes all the categories versus just limited does just those that we've detected data changes for. The last thing is a trickle, and trickle is really a pretty interesting thing. I think we've started to see where you can use a trickle process to reprocess just a certain category of data. So that if you're doing updates to, I don't know, budgets or forecasts during the day and you want to have that update, or you're doing updates to, our original intent here was around inventory and open orders where you have categories of data you want to refresh multiple times a day. You can now do that because number one, you can target those, and number two, this can run in the background and people can still be using Viewer and Stratum while this is running. So you have that option. So all those are things to consider. Certainly, if you've got further questions about that, we'd be happy to tackle some of those today if we can, or if you're thinking about making some changes to your processing based on what we've talked about, don't hesitate to contact any Paul, Adam, myself, or your sales rep, whatever, and we can talk to you some more about that. Let's see. And we did have one other question that Paul was going to talk a little bit about, which was something.
On editing measures and why things down at the bottom, specifically with time range, some of the fields are grayed out or disabled. So let me go back over to, where's the demo here, Frank?
First one.
Mouse cooperate. Okay, so let me bring up a very simple view. And in this view, I've got the same measure. It happens to be our current month is September 2017.
Right.
So I've got current month, year-to-date for the current year, same thing for last year, so 2016 current month and year-to-date. In order to, if I want to change things on these columns, again, I can double-click here. And this is going to show me all the time, all the regular measures that are used in that view. And right now, it just happens to highlight the column that I double-clicked on. And I've got all this information. So, you know, as Frank alluded to, you can go in and you can change all this stuff for this particular measure. And I'm going to need the keyboard. And I'm going to go ahead and select another measure here. So again, I can do a control and a left mouse shift. And now I've got two things highlighted up the top. So as you can see, things down at the bottom, as pertains to the from and to, get grayed out. So why is that? Anything that these two measures don't share in common get grayed out. So in this particular case, I've got the same measure name, but one, again, was the current month, the other was January through the current month. So that starting period is grayed out. I can't change that. I can change anything else. I can change these two to a different year. I could change this to a different ending month. Okay. If I were to add some other measures to this, just to illustrate that, whoops, wrong button there. All right, why is it doing that to me? As usual. Let's go out of here and try that again. All right. Not sure why that's happening. But as I selected other dimensions and had other things highlighted, you would see that at the end of the day, the things that I can change become less, again, because those are things that are not in common. Now, another thing to do, or that you can do within this, is also select the measure that's being used or being displayed. So again, these 4 columns all use sales amount. That's great. Maybe I want to have that same time range, but switch it over to a different measure. Maybe I want to see units. Well, there we go. So I can go ahead and change that, and that's going to change all the measures that are being used in all the columns. So it's a nice, quick way to go from dollars to units to cost to whatever you want to see. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit, not really pertaining to things being disabled or grayed out, but is this offset. The offset allows you to take whatever that period is, that from and to, the from year and period, and then do an offset. So for example, I could do a -10. There we go. So that's going to tell viewer to start at the current month, in this case September, and then go back 10 periods, or whatever the time unit is. So in this case,
right.
months.
Yeah, it's the time related to the time unit, right?
And what's nice about that is, you know, for the period, and also for the year, we've got things like absolute time, right? So you got January, but you've also got things that go back. In this case, we go back 6 months ago. Well, maybe I want to do a rolling 12 periods or rolling 18 periods. So I want to go from my 2 is my current month, but I want to go back 12 periods, or in this case, I want to go back 10 periods. Well, I can do that now. I can just set these both to current month and go back, in this case, 10 months. So go ahead and apply that to that first column. And now that takes from September 17th, it goes back 10 months, and now I've got November of 2016. So it's a real handy way to be able to, if you need to, like I said, have a rolling 12 months, rolling 18 months. It also helps get away without having to do some admin to create a relative time period that goes back that far as well.
I think what we'll do, that was the last of the questions that we had sent to us. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody, or you can use chat if anyone has any specific questions.
Unmuted.
I believe you should be able to speak with us now instead of us just kind of wandering through our subject matter. Any questions?
Hi, this is Cindy from Neil
Hey,
Jones.
Cindy.
Hey, I'd been actually posting some questions, but I don't know if you guys are seeing them or not.
You've been posting them in questions and not chat.
Questions and answers. Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry about that, Cindy. We were monitoring the chat, not the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Can you see the Q&A questions or?
Yeah, I'm reading them now.
Okay.
Okay. I'll talk about a couple things here, and then Cindy, if you've got other things that come up, certainly, let me know. So I got a couple of things that came in through Q&A. One would be when will 7.0 be available? Very shortly. I don't have an exact date, but we're actually code complete and test complete on 7.0. There's some some ancillary wrap pieces that we're working on, as well as a little bit of marketing stuff. But I would actually expect an announcement on 7.0 in the next week or so. Let's see. Yeah, sure. I can. One of the questions was adding prompts to a view. So I'm going to go into I don't know if you guys are familiar with prompts. When I say a prompt, I'm going to go in here and just show an example of one real quick. Here's sales to plan performance. You can see that this actually prompts me for do I want to enter a sales rep or a product category or a list of categories. So these are different kinds of prompts you can have. Here's a drop down and I can select a sales rep. Here's a search where I can search my product categories. So I could key in a search and search for things, or I can select multiples here. And then I also have, if I want, excuse me, I can also have a prompt that says, hey, do you want to use a user list, which I don't have any for categories, but nonetheless, if you had user list set up, you could limit by a list. So let's just talk about how I got those things out there. So I'm going to run a view that doesn't have them. And here you have a simple view, and the first thing about these things are you have to have them in the view. So if you want to create a prompt for, let's say we wanted to create a prompt for a particular salesperson in this case. So salesperson is in the view. You can see it's in the view. It's over here. I can now add what we call parameter groups. So I'm just going to go up here, and amazingly enough, I'm going to click the add button. And I got to give it a name. I tend to call this, in this case, I'll say rep. You come down here, and I'm going to pick my salesperson here, and you can say whether or not it's required. So in my case, I'm going to say no. But if you have a really large view that you're trying to limit what someone looks at, because you're going to list off, I don't know, all the orders for the current year, and you want to make sure they just do it for a single customer, you can turn that on, and they have to search for the customer first, and then it'll go and the view will return. So I'm going to say yes, no, and then, so that just tells me essentially I want to have a prompt for rep. Now I have to say what kind of a prompt do I want to have. Do I want to have a drop-down box? Do I want to have a search box? Or do I want to use user lists? So I'm going to come in here and I add underneath there. And this is actually where you can also, and you have to give this a name. And an important part of these names, I suggest you be really consistent with them, because if you want to use links into Stratum views, this is the name of the parameters you can pass into a view. So that's probably an additional subject, but nonetheless, you can in fact use when you create your URLs, you'd like to have pretty meaningful parameter names, and this is one way to do that. And then carrying on with my example, you pick a type here. So I can have a type that is either select members, which is basically a selection of lets you search, uses the search box that we have for that dimension, so it'll come up and let you search for members. And this is how you can select multiples. If you want to be able to select multiple reps, for example, you'd want to use this. If you want to use a drop down, this just obviously drops down, gives you a list of everything, and but you can only select one thing in this case. So that's the big distinction between select members and drop downs. The drop downs, by the way, work really cool in a touch environment as well, because it lets you finger scroll through them as well. But here, if I said, I'll just leave this, I'm going to say select members here, and then this is the prompt the user is going to see. So I usually say something like select rep or reps, and then something like blank for all. You could use a default value. If there's a certain way you want this to come up all the time, you can actually select a rep at all. And in my case, this is a rep. But if you're doing something with the company, et cetera, you can say a default. I typically leave the default blank because I'm asking the user to make a choice when they come in prior to the view. And then the last thing is you can say what text do you want to use. It can default to however you're showing the rep in the view, or you can say always use the long description, whatever you have in the view. So I'm going to say use the long description. So I'll just say OK. And you'll see now I have a prompt that came up on this particular view. And you can see now I can go ahead and enter I can go and select multiples. I can select one. I can do whatever I want here, and you'll see that selected multiples. And what will happen is I probably wanted this in the view. I actually have it in the view if I'm doing this, so there we go. So it showed data for the ones I selected. Now you'll see there's a new indicator up at the top, a new icon. this allows me to, I can reprompt and I could reselect what I want to see. So I can come in here, clear them out. Maybe I just want to do it for everyone now, so I'll leave it blank and I'll run it for everyone. So that was a real quick run through on adding that. One of the things that when I talked about passing parameters, et cetera, there was a prior insight class on that. If you want to look that up on the archive classes, if you want to, by adding a prompt, you also then open the door to using a URL where you can pass in the customer or the product to a view when you're trying to access that from another separate application. So that's something you can do. Another question, man, we should have been, next time we'll watch these things. There's some good questions here. So the other thing another question that came up was about an example of showing what I call voids or what someone hasn't bought. And I have an example of that product. I think this is it. So here, the question here is, shoot, that isn't really the one I wanted to show. Here we go, product voids, here we go. So the question in this view, what I'm trying to show is for some select set of products or select set of customers, whatever it may be, what somebody didn't buy. And one of the tricks to do this is to go ahead and use a couple of features that are available on the rows and columns that specify what one is called the empty filter and the other is called relationship filters. And to talk a little bit about that is that when you're asking what someone didn't buy, what you want to see is data that we don't have in Stratum. Essentially, there's no transactions between, in this case, this customer and these products. So I'm trying to understand what that is. So there's pros and cons to this. And one of the things that I'll just kind of show, in this particular example, just so you can see what's happening is, I have customer, I'm trying to find one that goes all the way, yeah, so no one is buying this first product this year. There's really no data for this product you can see here in the current year. So the blue indicates no one's buying it. So one of the things that I do to make that happen is, if you look, I don't click there, I click over here. And if I was to look at the rows, definition of the rows, what this is saying, whoops. My example's wrong. I hate it when that happens. Okay, just remember everything I said. I'm going to show a different view. Product voids, yeah, here we go. So this one shows. So this one will show it. So, no, where was the other one? Oh, product exclusion. There we go, yeah, yeah. So here I'm going to pick, so I'm trying to limit my customers in this case. I'm going to go ahead and click wholesale groceries, I think is my, I'll say okay. Oops. So this is, I'm using a prompt and I'm going to select some categories here. I'll say fresh fruit. So I'm going to try and understand customers in this particular SIC code that are in that SIC code, who's not buying, everyone's buying it. Here it was, I thought I had a great example of this. Let's see. So there we go. So now I have some people that aren't buying it. So essentially what I've got, here's all the products that we have, and are people buying stuff in those products. And if I go into in here and I look at rows, my example. Okay. So, so I don't have an example of this. I thought I had an example.
Live.
Yeah. So what I'll do though, I will actually post something on the forum about this to answer this question. I thought I had an example. My examples aren't showing you what you need to see. And the trick is when you turn off the relationship filter, that allows viewer to go in and say, hey, I'm going to show you all of the data for any, say, product related to this customer, even if they didn't buy it. Then you also, at that time, have to turn on the empty, you have to say empty filter no, because you want us to show you where there's empty data. So in fact, it's a combination of those things. So that said, you have to be very careful with this, because if you turn this on without any restriction, what that's going to do is say, hey, this customer is going to show you, or for this customer, I'm going to show you every single product that you have, whether they bought it or not. So somehow you want to restrict that list of products, and you can't just do it via drill down, because unless you have those things set as virtual dimensions, at which point if it's a virtual dimension and say it was a product category, it will only show you only the products that have that relationship in place. If you don't have any other relationships like that, it's just going to show you all your products, and you can often get a runaway view by turning off the relationship filter. But I apologize for that, but I will go ahead and set up a forum entry about that, and you guys can kind of watch for that, and you'll see the answer to that. Then another question was about demand and just kind of looking out into the future. So I have a view that we use in Stratum to talk about this, where this goes out and you can select for a particular brand or whatever, however you want to select for this. I'm going to go ahead and select, I don't know, I'll say first choice here. So this is going to give me a list of all my products for this particular brand, and it shows me a number of things. It shows me, number one, shows me what I have on hand for that product. So this is actually looking at my current month's on-hand inventory. This shows me, in my example, if this is a make or a buy product, it shows me any purchase orders or any work orders I have open for these products, because I want to include that into the calculation of what's available. Then this shows me my open orders. So my open orders are obviously any sales, or maybe not obviously, but any sales orders that I have open for the given month that I'm looking at. So that, and then I incorporate a forecast that we have in Stratum, which you could either generate in Stratum, or you could bring in from another source, or you could even use, say, the rolling 3-month average sales number here and say, hey, this is what I expect to have happen based on the last 3 months or 6 months or whatever number you want to use there. But setting up rolling averages is pretty straightforward. And then I just do the math to say, hey, what's available? What's my demand? And my demand is actually the forecast. It's either the forecast or it's the open orders, depending on which is larger. So under the covers here, we actually, when we calculate how much is available for inventory, it's the sum of on hand plus the anything that's coming into inventory, any expected receipts, and then it is the demand is actually either the forecast or the open orders, whichever is larger. And then I use that number to go ahead and calculate over here, the next month out, and this is for the next month out. So this particular example is showing me for the current month. Then the stuff in green is for the next month, and the stuff in yellow is for 2 months out. So hopefully that gave you some idea of how you do that, et cetera. The trick here really is obviously to have inventory, and the other, whether or not you have this in your inventory, you might have a planned receipts measure already, and you don't have to get stuff out of manufacturing or purchasing. You might already just have a planned receipts number that you have. And then of course the other is the frozen forecast, and what you want to use for that number. If you have a forecast, you could use that. If you don't have a forecast, you could use, say, a rolling 3-month number there. So there in that column, I would actually say sales for the prior month minus 3. Is that right? Yeah, the last 3 months. So I'd say for minus 3 months up to the prior month, so that would give me complete months of sales, and then I can just take and divide that by 3 and get what the average is. And that would give me a rolling average for that. So that would help me generate kind of a moving average as I go through the year. So you can do different things there. And then, of course, this is some math. And then the last is I set up an indicator here where this particular indicator looks at a couple of things. And you can see here, I'm actually going to change my brand here. I think I've got some better data over here. So, not much better. I, in general, have an inventory problem in my demonstration data, but it does show me a couple things here. The indicator here, so I set up when I did the math on the available to promise, basically I'm out for open orders. So this exclamation point lets me know, hey, I've got open sales orders and I can't even cover those. If I go down to the red dot, this actually means I've got my open orders covered, but I'm short for the overall forecasted amount. And then I actually have another piece in here, which is a gray up arrow in a red column here, which would be we've got too much inventory. And in that particular case, I've got more than 50% additional over and above the inventory to cover my current demand. And that 50% is obviously a number you could adjust, but that's something that we, just a number that we used to show an example. So hopefully that helped a little bit with some of that. Let's see, any other questions or comments that people would want to know anything about? I'm going to assume that's a no. Okay, well, with that, hey, everybody have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks, at least via this mechanism. And what are we doing in a couple of weeks? I forget.
I think you have adding data.
Oh, am I doing data copy, aren't I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so the new 7.0 data copy feature, we're going to talk about that next week, or in 2 weeks. So in 7.0, there's a new user-driven data copy, so if you want to getting to our demand question, if you want to copy sales to plan, you can actually do that, for example, right from inside Viewer, and it'll actually update the cube behind the scenes for you and make the data available for you right after you do the copy. So that's a feature that's coming up, and that's kind of the basis for some of the other things we're doing longer term in Stratum with regards to letting users, or at least analysts, business level analysts with right access, begin to add more and more data into Stratum on their own without having to go back to IT to do that stuff. So that'll be the beginning of that. So everybody have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys soon.